Americans are living longer. We have a best-selling author to explain the keys to long-term financial and physical health. Plus, identity theft impacts consumers and businesses alike. We'll discuss how vulnerable we all may be. This is 7-Day Yield.
Welcome to 7-Day Yield. I'm Lydia Morrish.
And I'm Mitch Rochelle, and here's what's trending. What's keeping CEOs awake at night? According to PwC's CEO survey, not surprisingly, uncertainty causes insomnia. In fact, concerns about economic growth lead the list of CEO worries. Interestingly enough, the second on the list of stress is that brought on by overregulation. Rounding out the list of sleep loss contributors is access to talent, geopolitical uncertainty, and the speed of technological change. And I thought I didn't get enough sleep.
It seems financial services is not the only industry facing disruption. Commercial transportation companies can no longer expect it to be insulated from competition. In fact, only 28% of the industry can claim a high level of digitization today, according to a recent survey by PwC, signaling a high level of reluctance among carriers to fully embrace new technologies and business models. A common reason cited in this study for not investing in new systems is that their traditional rivals have yet to invest themselves.
As millions of Americans are filing their tax returns, most are unaware that someone may have beaten you to it. Tax records are one of the latest targets for identity theft. The IRS recently issued a warning alerting taxpayers to an emerging phishing scheme targeting individual taxpayers. One particular scheme involves bogus emails claiming underpayment and requesting funds to be sent directly to the IRS. While the IRS is making actions greatly enhance their detection and prevention efforts, it is prudent for taxpayers to be on high alert as well. If you receive one of these suspicious emails, forward them directly to the IRS at phishing@irs.gov. Later in the program, we'll dive deeper into identity theft and other threats. But first, welcome back to 7-Day Yield Gene Chatzky, best-selling author and financial editor of the Today Show. Gene has a brand new book out entitled Age Proof: Living Longer Without Running Out of Money or Breaking a Hip. Welcome back to 7-Day Yield, Gene.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Literally, every time I look at this, I just chuckle. So let's talk about the running out of money first before we get into risks of breaking a hip.
Absolutely.
So why now is that such a big issue in society?
So the population, as you know, is aging. We are going to live longer than we ever expected to live. And what became clear to me and my co-author on this book, Dr. Michael Roizen of the Cleveland Clinic, is that if you have either health or wealth working in your favor, it's not enough. You actually need both of those factors, and the same strategies that help you improve in one area of your life actually help you improve in the other.
So a clear linkage between healthy finance and healthy living?
Absolutely. Healthy finance, healthy living, happy living.
So people who are bad at one are a hot mess in the other? Is that
Not necessarily, but people who improve in one tend to improve in the other. And you've noticed this if you've ever gone on a diet and then noticed that your credit card debt is going down at the same time, or the reverse. I worked several years ago on the debt diet on Oprah Winfrey's show, and what we noticed was that as we had people getting their financial life in gear, they started to lose weight and they weren't even trying.
Interesting.
Maybe they should do away with online groceries and it's one click away.
Exactly.
Ice cream, one click away.
Mm-hmm. Really is in New York. Yeah. I know one of the things you mentioned was being able to put aside, a certain percentage of your income and then withdrawing that once you actually get into retirement. How does geography play a role in that? Because I think, I look at myself in New York City and I think it's so much harder to save than, say, my counterparts in North Carolina.
Well, that's absolutely true just because of the outsized cost of housing in places like New York and other places along the coast. Importantly, we tell people try to save 15% of whatever it is you're making and aim to put away 10 times your last salary by the time that you retire. Now, if you're in Peoria, which happens to be one of the places I grew up, that last salary is probably going to be lower than it is if you had been working at a similar job in New York. And your cost of living in retirement, the same cost of living that you're expected to and trying to maintain, will be lower depending on where you live. One of the cheats that we suggest in the book, one of the course corrections for people who haven't saved enough for retirement, is to pick up and move, to figure out where you could live less expensively, sell that home, which you've hopefully paid off, and take the proceeds, plow them into someplace for you to live, but also buy yourself some extra financial freedom by putting a good chunk of that cash away.
Is that in retirement or as you approach retirement?
You should be thinking of this as you approach retirement. It helps to have a plan. It also helps to talk with your significant other, your spouse, the other person in your life who's going on this retirement ride with you about what you think you're going to want to do once you slow down, because surprisingly, a lot of couples never talk about this, and then he wants to retire and she's not ready, or vice versa, and they want to live in different places and do different things, and it can be a hot mess if you're not careful.
So let's talk about the hip breaking part
Yes.
of it. You know, you and I, and we talk about this a lot, have aging parents, and I think about that kind of stuff all the time, but the book suggesting it's something you think about not when you're in your 80s or 90s, when you're in your 50s or 60s.
Right, and by the same token, I don't want people waiting even till their 50s and 60s to start thinking about putting money away for their future. I'd rather they do it when they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, because time, as you know, is money. But when it comes to your health, the same thing is really true. You can put off a lot of chronic diseases with good behavior when you're younger. And chronic disease, although many people think that what we spend our healthcare dollars on are those last few years of life, 84% of the money is spent on chronic diseases. And you can put off 3/4 of all of those chronic diseases by not smoking, by eating well, by moving, i.e. getting up off the couch and moving around, and by avoiding stress. Those 4 things done regularly, and again, we've got strategies in the book.
You had me on the first 3, that last one.
I know, and financial and health stresses are different, right? If you're in a traffic jam and some car is on your bumper and beeping away and you're stressed out, you can just breathe that away. You can take a couple of deep breaths, you can calm yourself down. If you've got a health issue, or you are facing a financial crisis, or your job you think is at loose ends, those are not the kind of things that you can deep breathe or meditate away. You have to actually tackle the source of the problem.
Hence why I'm moving to a quieter neighborhood.
There you go.
But you're not moving to North Carolina.
No, not today.
I think you're from North Carolina. Anyway, Jean, after the break, we're going to have you back and talk about identity theft. So don't go anywhere. And audience, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to 7-Day Yield. I'm Lydia Moorish. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that with the increased use of technology today comes the possibility of cybercrime. Mitch recently sat down with Genevieve Gimbert from our fraud protection group to learn more about the fraud threats businesses are facing today. Take a listen.
So what are the real risks that are out there to enterprises in the fraud space?
Yeah, so Mitch, the threat landscape is constantly evolving, but there are really 3 fraud threats that we see today. One is account takeover, business email compromise, and insider threats. Account takeover is when a fraudster...
A fraudster?
Yes.
I love that. It's like a hipster. It's like a hipster gone bad, a fraudster.
Fraudsters, cyber criminals, really gains access to your account using a username and password, for example, change your contact information to reroute notifications, and then they authorize the transaction and move money around.
And is it always money that gets compromised, or can it just be the theft of an identity for some other nefarious purpose?
That's a really good point, because the most recent fraud threat that we're seeing today is around synthetic ID, and that's when a fraudster uses, for example, Mitch's social security number, Genevieve's mailing address, and someone else's name, creates this fake persona, and opens a bank account and then perpetrate the fraud. So the synthetic ID is a huge issue in the industry today. Organized crime rings are now automating this account takeover scheme. So for example, they're creating bots, right? Thousands of bots to execute password cracking attempts and take over your account.
Now that I won't sleep tonight, what's the next threat?
So business email compromise, according to the FBI, there's been over $3 billion in losses since 2013.
$3 billion.
That's correct. And so with business email compromise, essentially these fraudsters spoof your email address or compromise your email account and send an email to someone who's authorized to move money. The third threat is around insider threats, and this is around data theft and unauthorized transactions as well.
From people who work either as employees or contractors to the organization.
That's correct, and I think that's a huge problem today because of technology. A lot of employees can take pictures of customer information or any MNPI or any sensitive information.
So it used to be the big risk was an employee stole office supplies. Now the risk is they can steal intellectual property or customer account data.
That's correct.
So how do organizations prevent the risk across all three of those platforms, if not more?
Yeah, so companies who don't have fraud departments today are building one. They're evaluating their operating models, they're conducting targeted risk assessments, and implementing more sophisticated analytics, real-time fraud detection tools to really understand what's happening across all different channels, and also using contextual information such as what device is it using, what is the IP address, geolocation, etc., and also using external and internal threat intelligence to augment those fraud detection solutions.
Genevieve talked about synthetic fraud and where these fraudsters are basically taking multiple people's identities and then compiling that to create a new identity. So do you have any tips for our viewers in terms of how they can protect themselves against things like this?
Unfortunately, there is no 100% source of protection, but the best defense against identity theft in general is a good offense. And by that I mean you really have to be a stickler about making sure that you are only on secure websites, which means it has a little S up in the search bar. You've got to change your passwords every 3 months with regularity, especially again for those important sites, for your financial sites, for your social networks. And a strong password is no longer a 6-digit password. These days, it's at least 10 characters. It's letters,
numbers. So is password not a good password?
I would say no to that. Password AB, maybe. No, letters, numbers, and symbols that all come together to form some word that is not made in the dictionary. And if you need to keep track of your passwords, it's okay to use a password manager, the kind that either comes with your software or the kind that you install separately. Boy, I could go on. There are a lot of things. Check your credit reports, because your credit reports are a good early indication if something is going wrong in your financial life. You may see action on that credit report and you can point to that and say, that doesn't belong to me. And when you're transacting online, credit is better than debit. And I know a lot of people who are trying to get their financial acts in gear and minimize debt, try to minimize their use of credit cards. The problem with this is that if you're shopping online and somebody gets a hold of your credit card number and they buy something, you very easily can shut that down. You change your credit card number, you alert the company, there is zero liability protection in place. It's a nightmare that's very quickly over. If it's your debit card, you do have zero liability protection, but that thief can actually get their hands on your cash and it can take you 2 full weeks to get the money back, which can wreak havoc with your budgeting and bill paying for the month.
Wow, my boyfriend actually just had his debit card
A woman who works with me did as well, and it did take her 2 full weeks to get the money back, and it's just a hassle that we can avoid.
So at the top of the show, I talked about things that keep CEOs awake at night. Jean just gave us 5 things that are going to keep me awake at night. But in the other headline, I talked about identity theft as it relates to taxes, and we are in that time of year. So a little bit on that.
Yeah, so we have had a problem the past couple of years, particularly when it comes to state tax returns with those fraudsters that Genevieve talked about, applying for your refund before you have the chance to apply for it yourself. So if through phishing, through hacking, through data that has fallen off the back of a truck, They've gotten access to your social security number, which, by the way, they can purchase very easily on a black market, as well as a few additional pieces of information. They apply for your refund. The best way to shut this down is just to file your taxes early. Because if you file before the fraudster files, then the fraudster gets shut out.
There you go. If there was ever a reason to file your tax returns early.
There you go. No more extensions.
We've heard Lydia's tax stories on previous episodes. Not good. Anyway, Jean, thanks for spending the whole show with us.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for all of you for watching.
Be sure to check out our PwC YouTube page for all our previous episodes. Plus, you can follow us on the Twitter handle below. We'll see you next time on 7 Day Yield.